This is Henry from Techlore on Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Kerry Parker, and today we have episode 265 for March 28th, 2022. And today we've got a really fun interview. I'm going to be talking with Henry from Techlore. Now, I've mentioned Techlore a couple times before, so you should have heard of them at least, but hopefully you've checked them out. But if not, I'm sure you will after this interview. So real quick, before we get into it, first of all, I got to say, you only have 5 more days to enter the big podcast 5th anniversary giveaway. Over $2,600 in prizes will be divided among 10 lucky winners. I will recap the prize list a little bit after the interview. And the key thing, though, is to remember, you got to do this before midnight Eastern time this Friday, April 1st. So if you're going to do it, get on it. All right, so let me set up this interview a little bit, and then we'll get into it. First of all, I got to admit, so this is a little bit of a meta interview. He and I are both kind of doing the same thing in our own respective ways. We are trying to educate people on privacy, why it's important and how to achieve privacy, and about what tools to use, what services to use, what things not to do. And so, a little bit of a mutual admiration society thing going on here. I will admit that, and you'll pick up on that. And, so we're talking about privacy with each other, and sometimes we kind of forget the mic's on kind of thing, and we're just kind of talking to each other. But along the way, we're going to cover some great products and tips on how to improve your privacy and why it's hard to be private today, and why it's hard to make recommendations, and how you figure out who you can trust when you're trying to determine which products and services are better for your privacy. So along the way, you'll get a little bit of a, maybe a peek behind the curtain of what it's like to be in our shoes, what it's like to try to educate you, our audience, about all these things, and the ins and outs of establishing trust, and doing the homework, and getting jaded sometimes, and getting frustrated along the way, and how we cope with that. So anyway, hopefully it's not too meta for you, but I think you'll still come away with a lot of great information from today's show. Now, I want to define a couple terms real quick that we throw out while we're talking. We talk about geofence warrants. This is something I've definitely talked about before. This is the thing where the police or law enforcement goes to, let's say, Google and says, hey, there was a crime in this area. I want you to tell me all the phones you know about that were in this 2-block radius or 5-block radius at this time on this day. And the super creepy, eye-opening thing is Google can do that. And it's not just the Android phones, it's with iPhones that are running Google apps as well. Google knows a lot about you, which is why I'm trying to de-Google my life. And I'm trying to help you do that as well. He throws out the term pseudonymous. It's not quite the same as anonymous. If something is truly anonymous, then there's no way to know who this data is associated with. Pseudonymous means that it's associated with some identifier. So the identifier should be something that doesn't give away who it is, but if you sometimes correlate that data with other sets of data that you do know who that data belongs to, oftentimes it's easy to take pseudonymous data and make it and figure out exactly who they're talking about. But that's what the term pseudonymous means as opposed to anonymous. He also talks about a honeypot, and honeypot in the security realm is setting up some really juicy target to try to get the bad guys to attack it so that you can either catch the bad guys trying to attack it, or sometimes it's just you want to learn how they will try to attack something. Sometimes it's actually to distract them from the real prize. Hey, look at this thing over here, shiny object, a lot of great stuff over here, attack this over here, and try to get them to not attack the real thing. So anyway, that's what the notion of a honeypot is in the security realm. Now, real quick, I will say, trigger warning for those of you who don't like swearing. There is a couple mild instances of swearing in this. I don't think it'll bug you, but, just in case, I'm putting it out there. But anyway, let's not wait any longer. This is a great interview. Let's talk to Henry from Techlore. All right, so today I'm talking with Henry, who's the CEO of Techlore. He's a privacy enthusiast, a runner, a coach, an artist, a musician, a book nerd, and a privacy advocate. How's it going? Welcome to the show.
I am great. Thanks for having me.
Well, I've been, looking at your stuff for a while. You guys do have some amazing content. And so why don't you start us off by giving us maybe a little quick history of Techlore and what drew you to privacy?
Yeah, so my whole journey started, and I wrote this out to try to be funny. So just you're gonna like this. So I know your whole thing is called Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons,
Right.
but they also didn't stop me in middle school from trying to access blocked websites. So that's where this all kind of started. I think in middle school, I was trying to access websites that were blocked. Even some Wikipedia sites were blocked by our school.
Oh, wow.
And so I started researching ways to bypass things, and I came across VPNs. And then that's kind of something I was very looking into for a while. And then over time, it kind of naturally transitioned into the privacy world. I think a lot of VPNs are, advertised as privacy and security tools, which they can be, but that naturally just led upon that discovery. And then I picked up The Art of Invisibility by Kevin Mitnick. And then I think from there is when I really started falling in love. And the whole Techlore journey kind of follows that pretty perfectly. If you go back to like our original, I think our first video is like how to get a free VPN on iPhone, which is still like a super, like hundreds of thousands of views, which is ridiculous. But then over time, like you start seeing the privacy guides coming out, and then that's pretty much all we do nowadays.
Yeah. So, getting deep here, what does privacy mean to you? Like, and what do you think most people don't get about privacy? I think a lot of people have an idea in their head. When I ask that question to other people, hopefully they're thinking themselves, what they think about privacy. But some people, maybe my audience does, but a lot of people probably don't really sit down and think about it. But when they do, what do you think a lot of people just don't get when they think about privacy? So what does it mean to you? And then what do you think people don't get about it?
First, I mean, I don't know. So first, I would say that the people who don't get it, I would argue, just haven't actually seen it yet.
Mm-hmm.
I was in middle school, early high school when I read The Art of Invisibility, and it wasn't, the technical defenses that were attractive to me. It was like, holy crap. Like, someone who cuts me off on the road, their license plate can get me direct access to their home address, depending on like who you are and like the way things are set up and what precautions that person has taken. That's one of the stories that Kevin Mitnick quotes, because someone cut him off, and then he talks about this story where, he tried to get the person's information. He was able to do it through a social engineering attack. And so it was all of these things to show how extensive, just like in real world and just in your day-to-day life, that the consequences of not understanding privacy can be. And that doesn't include surveillance capitalism and all the companies who are after this data. It doesn't include governments who are also just swiping up any piece of data they can. And especially the lack of any oversight of pretty much in most areas. Like, we do have the California Consumer Privacy Act, which is fantastic. There's the GDPR, which is fantastic, but that's really about it. Actually, Brazil, as of like this week, did update their constitution to now include data privacy laws, which is pretty cool. But the point still stands. To me, it's just a basic human right, and it's not really treated like that.
Yeah.
If you look inside the International Declaration of Human Rights, privacy's in there. This was written in the early 20th century, and it's still not something that I think is really treated seriously nowadays. And I think we're really starting to see the impacts of that. So I think I believe in it on a philosophical level, but it's also just kind of wild to me how little the average person seems to care about it, despite the constant red flags. So I really do think of like that meme where there's like fire burning down and the person's just inside the fire. This is fine.
Right.
It's really easy to stay in that bubble, but I think the quicker that people just realize how big of a problem it is, the better everyone else is going to be, because these problems are only going to get worse, right? Like identity theft, ransomware, other malware, account breaches. It's only becoming more widespread every single year. And I think those are the more real implications of privacy. I know that myself and yourself and probably a lot of people in the privacy world are more aimed at like perfect privacy and like trying to get people to like tip-top shape to deal with any concern. But I think just dealing with the basic problems like identity theft and ransomware and account breaches are probably a better starting point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's so much low-hanging fruit, and that I focus on that a lot in the book and other things to talk about. There's a lot of simple things that we could all be doing to protect our privacy that would really take us a long way toward better privacy. And so I definitely ask people to focus on those first. The other thing I think that I see personally is that a lot of people still can't get past the me aspects of privacy to the we aspects of privacy. I think there's a lot of privacy that your privacy and my privacy overlap, and so I think getting people to realize that will have an impact, and I think maybe that's coming on. What do you think about that aspect of that?
Yeah, that's actually something that I'm really glad you touched on, because I read your book, and that's something that was like, your book does go into a ton of your book really is for non-techies, right? And so a lot of the book is low-hanging fruit. Some of it does get more advanced, but a lot of it is low-hanging fruit. Here's a browser to install. Here's messengers to use. Here's better email providers to use. It's things that, yes, they are simple on paper and might take a while to switch over, but there's nothing inherently difficult about doing those things. And those things alone, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later in the interview too, like there's very basic things that you can do that'll take you a very long ways. Yeah, so I pretty much overwhelmingly agree. And I also did like, you actually did change my perspective on that because you did throw in some good arguments for why the privacy battle isn't just about individuals. And it's not something I quite considered before either. Because like, I mean, it's obvious. Like in our course, even in my course, in the Techlore course, I even brought up like, who can you trust? And the reality is you can't trust many people because you can't trust them to keep your information safe either. So that's just another argument for why people having better practices is just better for everyone. And you had some other good arguments in there too.
All right, so you already mentioned this, but I'm curious, what do you worry about more? Like, what keeps you up more at night? The more pervasive surveillance capitalism that we kind of see on a daily basis and maybe shrug off, or the mass warrantless surveillance stuff, like the stuff that Snowden revealed, and some of these things we found out about the FBI recently too. And of those things, which of those things worry you most?
So with this one, okay, so they're both serious problems. I think that most people who probably listen to this podcast think they're serious problems. I think they're both serious problems. But I personally, at least in the US as an American, think that surveillance capitalism is a bigger problem. Just because it's so unchecked, it's so invasive. And I would argue even the mass surveillance programs have more oversight than some of these companies do, which is sad to say. It's also... the other reason why I really like to highlight surveillance capitalism, it's, in my opinion, a much easier problem to address on an individual level than mass surveillance. Stopping the NSA from trying to collect your data is pretty darn difficult to do.
Right.
But stopping Facebook from collecting basic information about you, you can stop that. Like, there are ways to prevent that. Yes, it's very hard to completely de-Google and de-Facebook 100% of everything, just because there are just some basic requirements. Like, every website has Facebook pixels and Google Analytics set up. There's still ways to block those, but like the point is, like, they really are the octopus. They're the new railroad octopus of the 21st century that's just invading everyone's data. That's the way I like to look at it.
Yeah, the other thing that I like to point out, I usually make when I talk about that, is that one enables the other. The surveillance capitalism just makes all that data available. There's a lot of our agencies do an end run around the Fourth Amendment here in the United States against unreasonable search and seizures. They don't have to. It would be illegal for them to get that stuff directly, but it's not illegal for them to buy it from these companies that are already collecting it. Exactly,
and it was so refreshing during the antitrust. I don't know if you watched the antitrust. I don't even know what to call them. It was like a discussion between the politicians and then the big four CEOs of it was Tim Cook, the Google CEO.
Oh yeah, that was some time back, but right, the one you're talking about. Yeah, I did see parts of that. Yeah, for sure.
And they directly actually asked the Google CEO about geofence warrants. And I'm like, I would have never expected a politician to ask about geofence warrants, because that's such like an unknown thing that people don't know that happens. Like, you have an entity that's part of the U.S. government that is tied to the Constitution, who is by no legal means allowed to have direct location data for any citizen they want in the U.S. So instead of getting it themselves, they now tap on Google, who has everyone's location data, and they have Google give it to them.
Right.
And this is a pretty common theme, like you said. Like, there's things like Prism that allow them to get direct access to individual data, and there's so many other programs out there. But it was so cool to actually see that being brought up on public television. Like, we all saw that question come up and the silence that followed. So,
Yep. One of the things actually that made me reach out to you about this, the whole thing, was I read an article you just wrote, and I thought it was really a great article and brought up some issues that I haven't seen brought up, at least in this way, before. And so I want to talk to you about a couple things you mentioned there. And one of those was, you talk about a lot of the trouble we have, frustrations you have in the privacy movement right now, and you boiled it down to two main problems. And one of the first ones you brought up was what you called a lack of empathy. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so first, some context. This article, I am and have been very frustrated with things, just being frank. And that article, the original version of that article, was just written as like a diary entry for myself, because I was trying to like unravel, like, why am I so upset with everything right now? And then I had to take certain things and change them for public because, like there's some things I wrote that probably shouldn't be written for the world.
Right.
But yes, empathy was one of the things. And I'm just going to quote the article here because I'm going to quote this part of the article. So empathy is understanding we once used to have Facebook accounts. Empathy is understanding different people have different threat models. For those who don't know, threat models is just essentially what you're trying to protect yourself against, and it's understanding that different people are protecting against different things. Empathy is experiencing the emotions someone else experiences when they first learn about the privacy invasive world we live in. And empathy is active understanding when someone suffers a data breach, avoiding the temptation to shame the impacted user for not having better OPSEC beforehand. So just to kind of bring that back, it's essentially the further down the privacy rabbit hole that we tend to go, the more difficult it is to be able to empathize with the people who aren't as far down as you are. So the way I normally see this arise is users being shamed for not having tip-top practices, even though they're doing their best, right?
Yeah.
Just recently, we put out a Firefox hardening guide on our channel, and someone commented that they now have a hardened Firefox on Windows. And I'm like, fantastic. Great. You now have a more secure and private browser. Within the same hour that they commented, someone responded to them rhetorically asking, why bother hardening a browser on Windows? And it's things like this that I think are a serious problem. And they're actually like almost looked up to. These are the comments that tend to get a lot of attention on Reddit, throughout communities where people are looking for help. The two main problems with this is, A, it discounts all the legitimate improvements that people are making. Like the reality is using a hardened browser has improvements regardless of the OS you're using. And the second thing is it also makes someone feel like shit because it's a genuine improvement they made. And I know that the last thing I wanted to hear when I was starting to make my privacy journey wasn't outright criticism of how I wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
So, and I can't imagine many people who would prefer that. So I just think that's a serious problem. I feel like there's so little support for the noobs.
Yeah.
That's my long-winded answer. It's just that attitude, and the privacy world can really go without it.
Yeah, and I honestly, I think that's just a systemic issue we have today with social media today. It's just people, some of it's virtue signaling, some of it's just people who want clickbait, some of it's people who, feel that, I don't know, it's that they want to one-up somebody just to have people clap and say, yes, of course. I don't know. I think it's just a social media world, unfortunately, we live in. That's why I honestly, on my blog, I turned comments off. I didn't even want to have to deal with that. I just wanted to put myself out there. And while I look forward to people who maybe say something positive about it, I just didn't want to deal with negative trolley kind of comments. And I didn't want to deal with the kind of stuff you're talking about. So kudos to you for even attempting, for the people that are just purists, that they can't accept anything other than what they believe is perfect.
It's so funny too, because if you actually broke down a lot of these purists, if you broke down their OPSEC, they're going to have weaknesses too.
Of course.
So they really are picking and choosing what they believe is pure, because that person who is giving the other person crap for using a hardened browser on Windows, they're probably using a hardened browser on Linux, but they're commenting on YouTube with a Google account. So that's okay. So like, it's funny because like everyone has holes to poke in, and that's the whole point of threat modeling. Like if you have a good threat model together, you're aware of where you fall short, where you fall well. I don't know if that's a term, but like So I fully agree there. And what you said too is also something that's just very true. A lot of these problems that I did talk about in that article are not exclusive to the privacy world, and that only makes things more depressing for me, because it makes me feel a lot less optimistic of just the state of the world today, rather than just like the part of the life I'm very passionate about. It's like everything. Yeah. And also I wish I could turn off comments too. Honestly, it's like so demoralizing to have to read through comments. And the only reason I do is because like there's such a spam problem on YouTube, and also disabling comments on YouTube, like no one's going to watch your video. You can't, like, it's instant red flag if someone doesn't have comments enabled on a YouTube video, especially now that dislikes are gone. Unfortunately.
Yeah, right. So you kind of touched on this, but do you think that we too often blame victims for security and privacy failures? It seems like we do that a lot. Yeah,
so absolutely. I ultimately don't think it should be the user's responsibility to have to understand privacy and security. Like in a perfect world. So in my perfect world, I'm out of a job and you're out of a book.
Right.
Because privacy should just be guaranteed by default. But that's just not the world we live in today. The best example I can give to this that probably makes this very easy for people to understand is Bitcoin versus Monero. So with Bitcoin, you have little to no privacy by default. Everything is public and it's pseudonymous, but it's not terribly difficult to de-anonymize users. The user has to spend extensive time educating themselves on how to use Bitcoin properly, privately, and actually executing it safely without making any mistakes. And then you just have to kind of cross your fingers that whatever technique you used to mix your Bitcoin or make it anonymized, I put this in air quotes, anonymized, isn't de-anonymized going forward. And this question ages well because I don't know if people caught the recent Wasabi news. Wasabi was like an anonymizing service for Bitcoin that was recently de-anonymized. So that's option one. So you can kind of just like bet on Bitcoin and like hope that users educate themselves and be able to do it well, and maybe some of them will make it out alive. And then there's Monero. It has privacy by default. If you just use Monero, it guarantees better privacy than Bitcoin without the challenging requirements. And I tweeted something summarizing this recently, and someone responded to the tweet. And they said something along the lines of, it's not Bitcoin that isn't private, it's you who isn't private. So it's literally victim blaming, right? So I do think it's a serious problem because you can't blame users for having to deal with a crappy situation. And now you're asking someone to take time out of their day, energy out of their life, to now have to educate themselves on how to be private and secure. So that's why I like to give massive props to people. Sometimes we get comments on our videos that's like, oh, I just moved to Brave. And no one celebrates that. They get some likes, but it's like, oh, okay, they went on Brave. Well, I'm on tour. And it's like, okay, like that's fantastic. Like so happy for all of you. But like, come on, like this person, like for them, this is like a big step and like this should be encouraged. So I think there needs to be more of that. And also like victim blaming literally accomplishes nothing. That's the other part of this too. Like the damage is already done. Their Bitcoin was already de-anonymized. Their email was already exposed. Their password is already breached. You shaming them for something they did before that accomplishes nothing outside boosting your own ego.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, it's a problem. Sorry if this is a little ranty.
No,
but it's something I deal with literally every day.
Oh yeah. Oh no, dude, I totally feel you. The other thing is, and you kind of touched on this a little bit too, is that I think that a lot of in surveillance capitalism, a lot of the companies like to say, well, you've had the power all along. We give you all the switches and knobs you need to enhance your privacy. It's really on you. It's not on us. We've given you all the tools you need. It's like, Dorothy, you've had the power all along. You just could have clicked your heels and gone home, right? Except that you've got, in practicality, you've got an Imelda Marcos size warehouse of shoes you've got to find and click, because there's way too many. It's logistically impossible for everybody to find and change all these knobs, even if they did understand it, because they're using dark patterns to euphemize all these things about making it a personalized experience. Like, who doesn't want that? Well, it means they're going to track you, right? So yeah. And we blame people because they don't have privacy and they let all their information loose.
Yeah, it's really wild. Like it's just not okay. And,
right.
Like, yeah. Well, and what you said is right. Like the companies do this, the governments do it to some extent. Individuals inside the privacy community do it, which is like the most baffling. That's why it's like so disheartening to me, because the privacy world should be the best about this. And that's just not what I see, right? Like they should be the ones who should be the most encouraging and should be the most open arms about people wanting to be more private. And that's just not what I see. And I feel like it would only benefit people to be more nice about it, I guess.
The other major issue you raised in the article was what you call lack of evidence-based personal recommendations. You and I are in the same boat. We purport to know this stuff and try to help other people and make recommendations. When you're doing that, how do you account for all the individual nuances and varied threat models, when you're dishing out advice? How do you keep it simple and yet somehow keep it real?
Yeah, so that's the hard thing. And it's something you did well in your book. I think like putting disclaimers when necessary, adding just being new, like simply being nuanced is already a great step, right? Like you really like dive into things and you explain when this is good, when this is bad, how there's better options out there. But this is like reaffirming like why you believe something, and you at least base it on evidence to avoid any drama or beef. Like the main problem right now that I see on YouTube is something happens to an encrypted messenger. That doesn't actually jeopardize many people's threat models. And now it's like a big delete the messenger video. We've seen this with Proton Mail. We've seen it with Signal. We've seen it with Brave. We've seen it with a lot of browsers. And like, honestly, it's kind of the sad reality of, I guess, this is a little off topic to the question, but it's kind of the sad reality of like how much the current digital landscape rewards sensational takes too. And that's kind of a different problem. And like we've done this too in the past. I think everyone's guilty of it at some point. It's just a matter of being aware of it. It's just hard to get it right. Like finding that balance between like bringing awareness to a topic without doing it in a way that's going to make people think something that's not like true about it. It's just hard. But the varied threat models is something that I've always been trying to explore, and I don't think I've got it perfectly. So like my first attempt at dealing with this was in our course Go Incognito. During the course, there's a green screen the whole time, and I'm speaking in front of the camera. And in the first three sections of the course, I clearly laid out, hey, the colors of the background behind me are going to be changing depending on like varying degrees of the threat model. So when I'm covering something basic, it's green in the background. As things get more advanced, it turns yellow. And once things get very advanced, it's red. And then there's like a very rarely used black background for like the very, very tippity-toppity mitigations that people can take. So that was one attempt. Another attempt was our Become Anonymous guide, which we broke up into 3 different zones. Zone 1 is like easy, Zone 2 is moderate, Zone 3 is advanced. That's the same thing that we employed for our device-specific guides. So like if you're interested on how to make Windows as private as you can, we have steps that are easy, moderate, hard. Mac OS, Linux, all of the above, as well as mobile devices. Same thing with our Firefox hardening guide we recently did. It's like easy, moderate, hard. So that's like, I found that to be a very simple and approachable way for people because the hard thing about... And like we have a threat modeling guide too, so that's like another way that we've tried to at least directly address that. If someone has never been exposed to privacy before and they're just curious, oh, how do I make my MacBook more private? And they go on YouTube and search that up, you can tell them make a threat model, but they don't know what that means. They never heard it before. So it's very easy to just be like, here's easy stuff. And they can very easily see that. And then you get into the moderate section. And the really important thing here isn't that you're necessarily warning them. It's that you're actually addressing this is moderate. Right? It gives a user confidence knowing that, hey, this is actually a moderate step. And so if I do decide to do the steps and it feels overwhelming, that's because it's the moderate section.
Right.
I think something that really sucks is like, I think Tor is fantastic. I think it's very accessible and it is easy to use. But when people go just use Tor without talking about how slow it is to use, how your bank probably won't work on Tor, how you get captured on every website. When you don't bring out the negatives, it sets this expectation that it's just an easy tool to use day to day for everything.
Right.
And when people actually use the tool, they have that like massive realization of, wow, this sucks. Why are people not talking about how much this sucks? I think that's kind of another point here is like, we need to keep it real. Like we need to just come forward and be like, hey, this tool, it's going to protect you in these ways, but we should be the people that control the narrative because we're giving them, like we're telling them to recommend this tool. We should be telling them right off the bat, this tool sucks in this space, but that's okay. Like still try it out. That way we control the narrative and we can also make the expectations lower. So we're under promise and they can overachieve rather than us over promising and them underachieving.
Right.
I don't know if that helped, but yeah, the long story short, we spend like 2 weeks on each video for our main videos. And a big chunk of that, I'd say like half the time is spent just scripting and figuring out how to present the information in a nuanced way without being too nuanced so that people just get bored out of their mind. Because that's what I would be doing if it was like strictly for myself, because I can just like, oh, Signal is great for this, but there's a phone number requirement, which means for people with this threat model, you have to keep this in mind. But also, it probably doesn't impact 90% of these threat models. And so you got, like, I can just keep going, but, like, people don't care about that. People just want to know what messenger to use. So, I don't know. It's hard. I really liked the way that you approached it in your book. Like, I really did. And the way that you just generally talk about it is really solid. It's very, like, it's fact-based, and it's very personalized, and it's very just to the point. So I really like the way you do that.
Well, I appreciate that. And so one of the things I kind of decided early on was, and I've learned this over the years, that and another approach that some people call this good, better, best, or where they break things down by, this is good. If you just want a no-brainer, like this is easy to do, it's easy for most people, it works for 90% of the population. This is your go-to. This is your low-hanging fruit, or this is the good model. And then if you want to kick it up a notch, here's better. And then if you really want to get kind of off the walls, then there's this best, this nebulous best. luckily for me, like my goal all along was I'm focused on good. Like, I'm trying to get people like, here are the no-brainer things that you should all be doing. And then, I kind of add some flavor with some, and if you want to kick it up a notch, if you want to take it that one step further, or if you do have a kind of an odd, maybe a little more of a niche threat model, you can try this. Or I recommend this, and then, I'd say, well, but if that doesn't quite work for you, then definitely check this and this. But you guys do a lot of that stuff too. So you guys do videos, which are fantastic. I wish I had the time and the resources you guys to do those, because you guys have some great videos. So obviously you think that video tutorials is a great way to reach people. How have you found it most effective to get your points across to the average Joe who is not a technical person, who's not a computer person, quote unquote? What do you find is the most effective way to reach people?
That's a good question. I don't know. It's just, there's a lot of little things we do that people don't care about because they don't notice it, which is like total, and that's videos. Like people just see the video. They don't see the work that goes behind it. But like a lot of our videos, like we share with the whole team, and our whole team has different technological backgrounds. Like I think our community manager is probably the most technical of us three, and he probably is the most knowledgeable overall. So I'm not the most knowledgeable on my team, I don't think. And then our editor, I don't think that she's insulted if I say she's probably, like, privacy and security wise, the least technical of us three. And so like all of our scripts are normally looked over by us three, and we all have different perspectives on the script. And so we're all able to like chime in and be like, hey, this doesn't make sense to me. Or, hey, this is like this is too flushed out. Like you got to just condense this a little bit more. People are going to lose interest. On videos that we really like, our Become Anonymous guide was like a 4 or 5 week production cycle. Most of our videos aren't that extensive, but for that one, we literally had like, I think 8 different people that we got on board to like watch a test version of the video, to give their feedback on the video. And like, they were all like, we purposely chose people from different, like people who are like just fresh into the privacy world. We also picked people who are like very far into the privacy world. So that's like the little things that like people just don't know we do, because we don't talk to people about it. We don't tell people, like we don't need to tell people about it. They just need to watch the content and hopefully enjoy it. The other thing is we just spend a lot of time on scripting. And this is like not to bash on other channels, but a lot of channels just set up, and this is kind of to my third point, but we spend a lot of time on scripting and planning. And the third point is we do produce our content. I'm a big fan of how the Hated One, for example, actually produces content. Like he edits, he has B-roll, he has things to make it engaging. And this isn't to bash. There's different forms of content. Nothing's perfect. Like there's audio formats which have no video. We have our surveillance report, which doesn't have much video. It's just lots of talking. However, I don't find like the 2-hour live stream approach to be approachable for people personally. Like if I'm someone who like wants to pick a good browser, I shouldn't have to sit through a 2-hour video from someone who just turned on their webcam and just started talking. And again, no, like it's just a different type of like video format. It's like there's nothing wrong with it. I just don't find it as approachable. So it's things like that. We spend a lot of time on production. We spend a lot of time on like making sure it's quality content. Like we're on YouTube and we want to compete with other channels, even the ones that aren't privacy wise. Like we want our content to be good enough. And we're not developers, but we want, because like we ask developers and privacy developers to build tools that are just as good as the mainstream tools, right? So I think it's only fair for us to prioritize that equally for content, right? Like you have people like Linus Tech Tips producing this amazing content, and we're nowhere near their level, but like I want to get there someday. And just like I hope how Signal can match the feature set of Facebook Messenger and like, I don't know. That's not a great answer, but at least I hope that adds some context behind, I guess, some of the things that we do behind the scenes that people don't really know about.
Well, and you're right. There's so much that goes. I've tried to produce a couple of videos, and it does take time, and there's a lot of things I can't. You're so much better at it than I am, as far as you're much more of a natural. What I see, maybe it's good editing, but I mean, when I do these things, I have to do them so many different times, and I have a hard time not reading my bullet points and. And you guys do such a good job of making it engaging, and you guys have great content. And I totally agree, by the way, that keeping it in like bite-sized chunks, like very focused. This is about this. You can tune in for 5 to 10 minutes and learn everything you need to know in a very short. I mean, I think that you really nailed it with that format.
Thank you.
So okay. No company's perfect, and bug-free software just doesn't exist. So in our clickbait world, mistakes happen and they're blown out of proportion. You kind of alluded to this earlier. So as consumers, how do we separate the hyperbole, these really blown out of proportion headlines. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've seen articles like, stop what you're doing and do this right now. Or these are the 3 things on Facebook you must change right now. Or, this is why you must absolutely delete this app from your phone. It just drives me crazy, right? Things happen. But as consumers, how do we know what's hyperbole and what's truly consequential? How do we know who to trust in this world with clickbait? Particularly when some truly negative incident occurs, like that you mentioned Proton Mail. Maybe you can use that as an example. But how do we know that we can't just write it off? Because there are people, like you said, there are people out there will say, this happened, you absolutely can't use these guys anymore.
Yeah, so this is a tough one. First off, this issue isn't exclusive to the privacy world. That's how I'd like to start that. So I think a lot of the advice I'm going to share actually applies to really anything. I would say the first thing is understand motives behind where something's coming from.
Yeah.
If someone is constantly attacking a project and they have their own alternative to the project, that's a motive. It doesn't mean that they're not being honest. It doesn't mean they're not being truthful. It's just a data point. They have a motive that might work against that's all you need to know. It's just data points. It doesn't mean the person's not trusted, but it's a data point. Another thing is how they present information, I think, is a big one. Like, we constantly say all the time, we should not be your only source of information. I do not think we should be your source of information. I think we should just be one of many people you get information from online, because I don't think we're perfect. I don't think anyone's perfect.
Right.
So anyone who claims that they are the person with the best information...
Red flag, yeah.
Yeah, massive red flag. And this applies to anything. This applies to supplements who claim that, like, you're only going to get strong if you get this supplement. This applies to you're only going to get rich if you trust me. You're only going to get private if you trust me. Like, you just can't trust people. There's a great podcast called The Growth Equation that I'm a big fan of, and they call it guru syndrome. So really trying to avoid gurus on the internet. And actually, I'm trying to find the link to that podcast because it just applies to the privacy world so well. And also really diving into how information's presented, I guess. And no one's perfect with this. Like, we've definitely like, when I go back and watch some of the content, like, sometimes the person who makes it doesn't even have the worst intentions.
Right.
Like, when Brave dealt with their affiliate scandal, I was pretty pissed, and we made a video about it. And when I look back on it, I think the video was pretty accurate, but it definitely had the slant of I'm pissed. And so I think it is natural when an incident occurs like Proton Mail for people to be pissed about it and be like, I'm never going to use Proton Mail again. But that's more of a reaction than an actual assessment. So I think that's another thing too, is just like understanding, like, where is this individual coming from? Are they personally impacted by it? Is this breaking their trust in the company? Is this something that if they weren't involved with the team, they would be like, if someone didn't have a Proton Mail account, would they be assessing the situation the same way, I guess? For those who don't know, I don't know if you've talked about it on your podcast, but Proton Mail pretty much by the way, they do this all the time. This isn't like, for some reason, this headline specifically got a lot of traction, but a French activist who was using Proton Mail was part of an international investigation, and their IP address was handed over by Proton Mail, which, by the way, Proton Mail has a threat model blog post from 2014. 2014, this happened in 2021, this whole incident. In 2014, which was 7 years before this incident, Proton Mail put out a blog post saying that Proton Mail, during national investigations, may be obligated to comply with IP address handovers. And their privacy policy states this. It stated it before the event. What they did do is they updated the privacy policy to make it even clearer for people, because I think it's good that they made it clearer, because it was still a little bit kind of like, I don't know, this can be interpreted different ways. But this was blown completely out of proportion. People are saying Proton Mail is a honeypot because of this. People are saying that they totally de-anonymized a user's emails, which didn't happen. The email content is totally safe. All they handed over is an IP address. And ultimately, this just highlights, like, this is what we say, this is what a lot of, like, people say, you can't trust a single tool. Right. And, like, this company that you're paying $5 a month for, or maybe even $0 with Proton Mail, isn't going to save your behind in an international investigation. So this person should have been using Tor, which is even what the Proton people said. In fact, they even said, I don't know how true this is. I actually am kind of mad they even made this claim. But Andy, which is the CEO of Proton Mail, said if they were using Proton VPN, they would have been safe. So I don't know how true that is, but that was a claim he made. But yeah, I guess that also, just side note, but layer up, because not a single tool will ever protect you. So I don't know. I think there was a lot of good things to take away from that, but it's a problem that we're constantly dealing with, and we don't know how to deal with it either. because I don't think we're perfect, but I like to think that like we do take an evidence-based approach and we try to avoid this problem as much as possible. And I feel like it's hard to compete against people who aren't doing that, and people who are just writing these, this is compromise, that's compromise, this is compromise. Yeah, I just don't know what to do about it. So it's something I'm still figuring out.
Yeah, right. Again, we're back to the nuance, right? Nothing's black and white. There's going to be nuances to these things. And so I think it's great that you call that out and you make a point of saying that there are nuances, and you shouldn't just trust us. You should get your information from multiple places. I try to make those same kind of points too, but I completely agree with you. And I think it's also a great point that a big red flag is when anybody tells you, don't listen to anybody else, only listen to me. Yeah. That should be your first clue. Instant
red flag. Like, if anyone says that is like run home right now. Like, that is a big red flag. That is when you're a kid and someone's offering you candy moment. Like, it's that bad in my eyes. Like, no one should ever be in a position where they're actually having to tell you they're the only trusted source in the world on a topic.
Right. That was actually, this brings me up something I used to tell my kids, and that was something I grew up not understanding when I was a kid. And some of the most confident people I ever met, the ones who were almost bullyingly confident, turned out to be the ones who had the highest inferiority complexes, because that's how they coped, right? I mean, but they could pull it off. For anybody who didn't understand, when they come in, they just exude this confidence and absolutely sure of everything they say. A lot of people just soak that in. It's like, oh, these guys must know what they're talking about. But in a lot of cases, over the years, in my many years of life now, I've realized that a lot of those people are the one you can't trust, because they're the ones that are overcompensating for something somewhere.
Yeah, and on top of that, if you're so confident in yourself, are you actually going to be self-analyzing the weaknesses?
Right.
Yeah. That's the other drawback, because like, even if they do know what the hell they're talking about, if they refuse to actually acknowledge that they can make a mistake, they will make a mistake at some point, and they're not going to acknowledge it. So that's kind of the other layer. Even if they are somehow the smartest person in the world in whatever they claim themselves to be in, like, that's only going to last so long, because at the end of the day, like, they have to be able to self-criticize to get to the next point. So totally agreed. And that doesn't apply just to the privacy world. Like you said, exactly. It's a very common thing.
All right. So over the past few years, things have changed pretty rapidly, I would say, in the privacy space, certainly in the privacy space, somewhat in the security space as well. A lot of them have, been positive changes. There's been a lot of new options for protecting ourselves that weren't available before, which is great. But, the threats have evolved too, partially in response to those countermeasures. So, another deep question, is this a winnable war? Or is this just going to be a perpetual cat and mouse game? Is it always going to be finding the next thing and blocking the next thing because they come up with something new?
Yeah, I don't know. So this is a question that, like, I just don't know. I think I'm so far into the privacy world because I'm so immersed in it that it's just hard for me to even like step back and try to reflect on it, like what the last 3 years even look like. I know it's a weird thing to say. It's just really hard for me because I see both sides of it too. Like Google's trying to push Flock, and now you have Mozilla trying to work with Facebook and Meta on trying to develop something that's similar to Flock.
Yeah.
Which is funky, and
that is weird.
But at the same time, you have Mozilla pushing out better defaults in Firefox, and like Firefox hardening has never been easier. And now email aliasing is just a common thing, like simple login, Anon Addy, private relay from Apple. Like, these are all things that didn't exist 2 years ago.
Right.
And now you have like complete email privacy on the internet for the most part, for most threat models, at least. Like, you can hide your email from literally anyone you want to. It's great. You have things like, we are seeing new tools that make privacy easier. So while I think that the invasive technologies are also at least attempting to come forward, I'm also seeing tools that are making good progress as well. I don't think the browser space has ever been quite as good before. I struggle to say that because the browser space is always a little bit depressing, but it is still like better than it was, in my opinion.
You're right. Oh, for sure. Yeah. Right.
And yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't really know what direction it's going, but I see wins and losses on both ends. I don't know. I'd actually appreciate your thoughts on this one, because I don't.
Well, the way I phrase this is, I teach a class on security and privacy for seniors, and there's a bullet on the last set of slides in the last lecture where kind of prognosticate. I've got a bullet that says it's going to get worse before it gets better, and I have yet to remove that bullet.
I agree with that 100%. Like in regards to people being aware of privacy and like the whole movement altogether, you're totally right, because people aren't going to care about privacy when it impacts them. So if there ever is a way out of this, it is only going to get worse. Yeah.
Well, and unfortunately, it takes some nasty incidents, and I think to bring it home for people to kind of wake up and maybe see that where things really could go off the rails, and it's not hypothetical anymore; it's real.
Yeah, I think we need to hit people where it hurts for them to know. Yeah. Not we, but like I think it's gonna have to right. like the moment that the average American doesn't get their steak every day because of a ransomware attack that impacts the meat industry.
Right, yeah.
That's when privacy now is a priority.
Right. All right, so as we wrap up, and you do a lot of recommendations on the show, before I kind of get to some specific, maybe, again, low-hanging fruit, easy recommendations for people, when you're doing recommendations, as you're looking at products and services and trying to evaluate them to determine whether or not you want to recommend them to your audience, what are your general rules of thumb? Like, what are you looking for in a product? And maybe what are some immediate disqualifiers, these red flags? What are things, as soon as you see that, like, I can't recommend this?
Yeah, so almost always the first place I start is just seeing what other people's thoughts are on things. Like, that's normally the first place I start. I don't think I'm inherently any more smart or qualified than some of the other people in the space. So if someone is like, check out Fastmail, I'll right away look into like GitHub discussions on privacy guides about Fastmail and why is Fastmail not listed by privacy guides. So that's already like a get starting point. Like I want to see the criticisms and the things that people say about services right off the bat. So I at least have something going into it. And then I'll do some of my own research. I'll look into the service. I'll read the privacy policy. I'll get the other data points. Is this open source? Is this something that has any immediate red flags? And then from there, if it's something that's even worth considering, I almost always like to actually use the things. Like I can't imagine recommending things to people without using them unless it's like overwhelmingly a positive tool. Like I've never used Cubes before, but I can recommend Cubes to people because it's such an overwhelmingly praised operating system by so many people.
Right.
So that's just a general starting approach. As for like actually, this is a good example. So there's a service called silent.link. Silent Link is an anonymous eSIM service. So you go to their website, you send them Bitcoin, and they give you a real phone number that's an eSIM that you just load onto your phone. This takes like 10 minutes, and now you have a completely real number that's not a VoIP number. So it's a real number that's an eSIM that lives on your phone. So many red flags. Like first, like just the idea of what I just told you is like kind of a red flag because like getting phone numbers is quite hard to do.
Yeah.
Like real phone numbers. And also just the website isn't the most reassuring thing. There's very little information, but I decided to go for it and it's worked incredibly well. I'm still using the service. And we actually did a review of the service and I did very firmly be like, hey, I do have some issues with this service, mostly regarding trust. So please proceed with caution if you're looking to test this. So generally, I think our content is nuanced enough, luckily, for us to be able to still cover things, even the things that we don't necessarily like. Because we still talk about the things we like and dislike, and we still try to like make people aware of the common pitfalls in any particular tool. So that's generally the approach to our video content. As for our website does cover some resources as well. Like we have like recommended browsers, recommended phones, recommended XYZ. And my biggest complaint with that right now, which is something we're working on, is adding more context. Right now, it's literally just that. Recommended messengers, list of 5 messengers, and that's it. Ideally, you should be able to like hover over each one and it tells you this excels here, this is not great here. So ideally, there's some more context there to at least help people understand some of the pros and cons of each tool, which every tool has. So I don't know. I would say it's just a lot of research, and also being in the space for a long time has really been a big help in me just instantly being aware of when something is a big red flag and when something is like really cool. It's something you just get a knack for. I think you probably know that too. Like when you get linked some new project, you'll click the link and you'll either go, ugh, right away, because you already know that this is like probably a scam, or you're going to be like, oh, this is so cool, like right away without even like starting to scroll.
Right. Yeah, you do pick up a little bit of a sense for that after a while, because you're right. You look at these things all the time, and I get people recommending things I've never heard of. Things I get some of that stuff from you guys, to be honest. And it's like I'll go check it out, and yeah, we're kind of in the space, so I guess how we get the recommendations, and you do pick up a sense after a while. So hopefully we are providing that service for our audience.
Yeah,
that filter.
And for the record, we're not just relying on our sixth sense. We are like diving into them. I'm like, it's just a thing. Like the minute you access a website, you just know right away, normally, if it's good or bad.
Yep. All right. So got to ask the question. So what are some of your easy no-brainer, like, when your family members or your friends are like, hey, Henry, just give me the top 5. What should I be doing? What services and stuff do you wholeheartedly just rattle off the top of your head?
Yeah, so I actually listed these out, so this will be a little bit more listed. However, the first thing I'll start with is that this question has the assumption for people who are listening that this is someone who has done nothing for their privacy. They're just the average user. Right. So these recommendations, again, I'm not recommending people Tor, Whonix, and deleting 90% of their accounts the minute they talk to me about it. So that's kind of the context here before someone gets mad that I'm not told. So first, I normally start with Signal, just because you need a safe place to talk to people, to call people. And Signal, in my opinion, and by a lot of other people's opinions too, not just mine, it balances privacy, security, and usability incredibly well. Yep. Arguably one of the best for any messenger, in my opinion.
We're using it right now.
Yep, and it fits a majority of threat models just excellently. It's great. Yep. Aside from that, I think one of the easiest things that people actually enjoy doing, by the way, I've had great luck moving people from Chrome to Brave. I know there's Firefox. Again, I'm trying to make this as easy as possible for people. Right. Brave is much more familiar to people than Firefox, because Brave is based on Chromium. It has a similar UI to Chrome. And also, I think Brave is a little bit more usable for people, and it's just more familiar for people out of the box. Brave also has ad blocking out of the box, and it does all the privacy stuff all by default. The only thing I normally do is I disable people's crypto crap for Brave, because most people aren't interested in the crypto crap in Brave. So I normally just turn that all off for them, because I already memorized where all the freaking buttons are for the crypto crap on how to disable it. But people love Brave. They love it. It gives you ad blocking. It lets you play YouTube videos in the background on your devices. It's just genuinely a better Chrome. I can't think of a single thing Chrome does better than Brave. I just can't. So it's one of those things that I think is a great step, because you can tell someone you just improved your privacy by a lot.
Yeah.
Right. And you're getting a better experience out of it.
Yep.
From there, I normally try to target the search engine. Ideally one with Bang support. So Bangs are when, like DuckDuckGo, for people who don't know this, if you type in weather in DuckDuckGo and you don't like the results, you can add G ! At the beginning or end of your search query, and it'll automatically direct your search to Google. So it's really cool. There's a start page bang, there's an Amazon bang, there's a YouTube bang. You can essentially do searches directly from DuckDuckGo anywhere. Brave Search recently has been kind of my favorite. I prefer Brave Search over DuckDuckGo myself, and the people I talk to tend to prefer Brave Search as well. So I normally have them use Brave Search, which also has bang support. There's also start page. But I do not recommend Start Page to people who are using VPNs, since Start Page consistently blocks VPN users. That's a rant for another time. So just to kind of check in with where we're at right now, normally it's Signal or any end-to-end encrypted messenger, right? If they're in the iPhone ecosystem, iCloud backups are a big concern, but iMessage is still better than using SMS.
Yep.
So normally Signal, Brave, and then ideally a search engine. Those are the 3 get started points that are very easy for people. It's just changing something, and then everything works from there on out. From there, if they're interested in doing more, I don't like to push people. Normally it's a VPN up next, just because the things we've already done really address, Signal now gives you a safe place to communicate, right? Your browser, Brave, is now blocking trackers on websites you go to, and it's giving you a much safer browsing experience on all the websites you visit. And now you also have the search engine that's not tracking every search you're doing. With a VPN, you're also at least getting to hide your IP address, which makes it a little bit harder for sites to correlate traffic between them. And also, you're now hiding all your web traffic from your ISP. So this is a benefit, assuming you trust your VPN provider more than your ISP, which I personally don't find hard to do. And it's why I'm a little bit weirded out by people who are so anti-VPN. Because I'm even if a VPN is logging everything you do, you're still not in a worse position than when you were with your ISP. And if you did go with your, like, if you did trust a good VPN, which I'd recommend, like iVPN and Mullvad to a lot of people, it's they're pretty solid experiences. And I'd say the next step, and it's a very important step, but it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of dedication and a lot of energy for the average person. So I don't normally recommend this to people unless they're actually like interested in doing it. I'm not going to force people to do this. And it's locking down their accounts. So this means shutting down accounts they no longer need, enabling 2FA when they can, and moving over to a password manager. Again, I normally wait to do that just because it's a lot of work, and I find that it normally discourages people if they're doing it right off the bat. So
yeah, it does take time and effort, that's for sure.
Yeah. So just to summarize that, Signal, end-to-end encrypted messaging, Brave from Chrome, moving to search engine, ideally a VPN if they can, though it's not like a super priority in my book, and then also locking down accounts if they're able to. If they're not doing the account method, I normally at least get them started on aliasing, which I think is like the new easy thing for people to do. Getting someone to use simple login, super easy. And people actually enjoy simple login just for spam purposes, because now they can give a disposable email address to this website they don't actually want to give their email to. There's also privacy.com, which I think is a great aliasing service. There's also services like MySudo, which offer phone numbers. So I'm really starting to see more of the aliasing solutions as a very useful tool for people getting started with privacy, because it's very easy to understand and it's very useful, because it really breaks up that marketing pattern that people get. Because like if you're using the same email for everything, it's very easy to tie your accounts together.
Right.
If you use the same phone number for everything, it's very easy to tie your accounts together. But if you have aliasing, it's very hard to tie those things together. That was a long-winded answer for a simple question. So
no, those were top notch. Absolutely top notch. I totally agree. So last question before I let you go. Looking ahead to the future a little bit, what worries you, what gives you hope, and then where do you see Techlore going in the next few years?
What gives me hope is, so it's a double-edged sword. What gives me hope is the bad things that will happen in the next several years. I think that there's going to be bad things that happen, and I do think that there will be an influx of people in the privacy community. It sells itself, really, right? Like, I don't think it's even worthwhile, in my opinion, for people like you or I to have to do any marketing. Because people just naturally stumble on our stuff when something happens to them. Like, that is the marketing, which is like kind of the inherent like evil side of privacy, is like people only seem to give a crap about it when something actually impacts them negatively. So it's kind of unfortunate. I don't know. I'm really hoping that we see some more regulation in the next several years. I know that there's a huge part of the privacy world that is against control and centralization and is anti-government, but what we're doing isn't working.
Right.
It's just not. This whole idea of self-regulation and Facebook, like, people are saying, oh, it's okay. Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook, they're all going to compete. And whoever's more private, if that's what the market demands, that's what's going to happen. And what ends up happening? Facebook just buys everyone out. So, like, I just don't think this is going to happen. We have data and can prove the number of privacy improvements in places that have privacy regulation, which is California and the EU.
Right.
And we see better privacy in the entire world because of those places that have that regulation.
Absolutely.
So I really am hoping that regulation does kick in, because it's clear that what we're doing isn't working, and it will guarantee privacy to more people by default without them having to even do anything. And that's kind of the goal of all this. As for Techlore, I don't know. We have a lot of things on the back burner. It's hard because people think we need more ideas for things, and we have the opposite problem. We have a list of like hundreds of video ideas, and we just don't have enough bandwidth. Right. So, I mean, I can go into like all the ideas we have, but honestly, what I'm really hoping is next for Techlore is more people on our team. But to do that, like, we need more funds, we need more money, we need to get more popular. We need more, we see more funds. So ideally, in the next 3 to 5 years, we have more funds and we have a larger team, so we can actually do more things that we want to do. Because there's a lot of things we want to do, from like developing like actual software to putting out more courses for things like small businesses and whatnot, because that's a big question we get. People want to like start their business and they don't know how to keep the business private from themselves, and also conduct their business in a safe way for their customers. There's no resources for this. It's wild. Like, if you're starting a business, how are you going to know how to keep your customers safe? You just don't.
Yep. Right. Oh yeah, exactly. Yep.
So
Well, that's
yeah,
where
those
you
are
guys
kind
come
of
in.
the things.
So
Yeah, or
thank
anyone.
you. Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm a supporter. I support you guys on Patreon. I'll definitely put a link to that in the show notes. And folks, I recommend that people support this stuff in general because, in the marketplace, we've got to put our money where our mouth is. We've got to make sure that we're supporting people who are doing the right things, not only to, because they're doing the right things, we want to show them our support, but to show the other people who aren't doing the right things that there actually is a market for doing it the right way. So thank you so much, Henry, for coming on the show and for doing everything that you guys do.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And just to add on to that, we just put out a video about this actually. And it's about we started supporting some projects recently. And the crazy thing is we have a following of 175,000 people. And we're not that large in the scheme of things. We're just not. That's a lot of people, but we're not large in the YouTube side of things. And let's just say we had 200,000 just for simplicity's sake. If if each person donated a single dollar every month to their favorite project, that's $200,000 a month.
Right.
Which is 2.4 million a year?
Yeah.
Into the privacy world. And that's just $1. If it was $5, it's over 10 million a year. So the little things really add up. And so donate to your favorite project because you really do make an impact. We're small. Overall, the privacy world is very small. So just like Carrie said, donate to things because they need to see the demand for that. And we need companies to be aware that people are willing to pay for privacy and just make it more attractive. Sorry to butt in the last word there, but
no,
I just think it's
wonderful.
important.
Thanks a lot. Thanks again, Henry. I want to thank Henry again for coming on the show. I'm so glad we got a chance to hook up. I hope you guys enjoyed that too. Obviously, I got a lot of respect for Henry and what those guys are doing over there. Be sure, if you haven't already, to go to techlore.tech. That is their website. It's in the show notes, of course. They've got a lot of great content, that really, really good resources on privacy, including some really good videos, like their Go Incognito course that he referenced, which I am working my way through right now, and it's a wonderful class. I would recommend it to absolutely anybody. And I'll circle back to that in just a minute when I give a little bit more details on the giveaway, because Henry and his crew were kind enough to give away 5 licenses to that class to give away. Now, Henry and I talked a little bit about Proton, the company that makes Proton Mail, and Andy Yen, who is the CEO and founder. And I've had him on the show before. Turns out it's been a while. I can't believe how long it's been, but he is going to be back on the show very soon. I'm going to be interviewing him shortly, and we're going to talk about that incident that Henry brought up. And we'll hear straight from the horse's mouth about what happened there and, what any company is required to do in situations like this when they're legally compelled by whatever country they're in. Now, all countries have laws that companies must abide by, and how that's all to be honestly expected and something you just need to factor in when you decide what your personal threat model is. I love Proton Mail. They got great stuff. I have no reservations whatsoever recommending Proton and their products. I use them myself. So, fair warning, I'm already on I'm already on their side, but I think it'll still be good to talk to him about that and hear it straight from him about what happened and how we need to be thinking about situations like that. So also today, Henry mentioned the concept of aliasing a lot, and I would have defined it ahead of time, but I think it made more sense to talk about after. And that is this notion of we have certain identifiers associated with us that marketers love to know, because they can be used to track us. And the big ones today are usually our email address and our phone number. Very often, those never change. I mean, because we can use them anywhere, we tend to stick with one for life. But it doesn't have to be that way. And we can, in a lot of cases, certainly for email, and if we're willing to go a little bit further with phone numbers, we can create other identities and these other aliases for ourselves that make it harder to correlate our data across the internet. So yeah, completely agree with Henry that is a great technology that we need to use whenever we can. So one more quick thing before we go, and that is, again, that the big giveaway for the 5th anniversary of the podcast will end this Friday, April 1st at midnight. Actually, I think technically it's 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you listen to this podcast right away, you've got 5 days to enter. If you don't listen to it right away, you've probably got a lot less time. So again, $2,600 worth of stuff is going to be given away to 10 lucky winners. There's going to be one big grand prize that's worth over $600 by itself, and then 4 tier 2 prizes worth over $300 a piece, and then 5 tier 3 winners with over $100 worth of stuff each. The grand prize winner is going to get the physical stuff, a bunch of books, including my book, a signed copy of my book, a copy of Privacy is Power by Carissa Valise, which I really like, several really nice tech books from my publisher, A-Press, and two, not one, but two YubiKeys. They're really popular version 5 NFC security keys, and a t-shirt from StartPage. The grand prize winner will also get one of my highly coveted security enhancing challenge coins. Now, the top 5 winners, including the grand prize winner, will get a 1-year subscription to the Priv app, a free pass for the Go Incognito course from Techlore, and a 1-year subscription for Fastmail. And all 10 winners will get a free 1-year subscription for Malwarebytes and a free 1-year subscription for StartMail, and a PDF copy of my book. So lots of great prizes and lots of ways to enter. You can enter multiple times. The more times you enter, the higher your likelihood of winning. And part of that includes referring friends. The more people you refer, the more entries you get. So spread the word, post it all over social media, share it with your friends and family. You've only got 5 days left. All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in. That's our show for this week. We got another news show for you next week. For my patrons, they'll get a little bonus content with Henry and I. Lots of great interviews coming down the pipeline. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead and do that so you can make sure you don't miss any of them. And if you get the chance, I would love to get some really nice reviews for the podcast. The best place to do that, honestly, is on iTunes, because that's where most people get their podcasts. But anywhere you do it would be much appreciated. I do watch the ones on iTunes, so if I see one there, I will read it on the air as my little way of saying thank you. And if you happen to have a copy of the book, I would love to get a nice review on Amazon as well. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for this week. Take care. Stay safe out there. And until next week, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.